Hello and welcome to Brainstorm Creates! Today I will be making a custom Nimona doll. I've loved Nimona since my best friend gifted me the graphic novel back in 2017. Then the movie came out this year, right after I started doll making. If you didn't know, this is my first custom Luce from the Owl House, and you can find her whole creation process on my Instagram. Anyway, for my second ever custom, I will be making Nimona, and she will be a mix of the graphic novel I've loved for so long and the adorable style of the movie. So, without further ado, let's get started! For this doll, I will be using a Generation 3 Draculaura body, and a Generation 1 Claudia head for Nimona's signature toothy grin and shorter, chubbier stature. To prepare the doll for customizing, I start by cutting off all of the hair that it came with. This hair was colored with some red marker, but that's alright. We're not using the hair anyway, so we'll cut it all off. The next thing I do is I pour out some boiling hot water. Then I take the head of the Draculaura and the head of the Claudia and dunk it in. Now that the vinyl is soft, we're going to yoink that head right off and chuck it to the side because we will not be needing it anymore. Now we take a pair of pliers and scrape out all of that glue and gunk from inside of the Claudia head. Yuck, it's really gross. After that, I take 100% acetone and remove the factory face. It looks kinda weird when I do this, but that's okay. Life of a doll customizer. Now it's time for some body mods. I will be sculpting a tummy for the doll, and to do this, I use Apoxie Sculpt and some silicone sculpting tools. I also use my fingers with a little bit of water just to smooth everything out, to make the sanding process easier later. After sculpting, I will put holes in the back for magnets using a hot nail to melt through the plastic and an X-Acto knife to widen the holes. I did it this way due to not having a drill at the time. And of course, a warning, if you decide to try this method, please be extremely careful. Anyway, this is what those holes ended up looking like, and I just placed the magnets in and cover them up with epoxy. It's now time to create a pattern for the dress. To do this, I first covered the modified body in tape. I always forget you only need to do one side though. Then I mark the areas where I want the seams to end up being. I then use a craft knife and my tiny orange scissors to cut off the tape, again being incredibly careful. From there, I lay the new pattern flat onto a piece of paper and trace out the tape. This makes a paper pattern. I really didn't like how the first iteration turned out. The seam down the front was especially pretty ugly. So I did some altering and ended up with the second version. This will be the pattern I use for the final dress. Here's how it looks. Now, it's suffering time. For this project, I wanted to create doll-sized scale mail. To do this, I started by circle punching some soda cans. From there, I aligned them on the sticky side up of some painter's tape. Then taking a screwdriver, I don't have a hammer, I make holes in the top of each circle to make them essentially a bead. Then I take them off of the tape using the same nail, and I then take my tiny orange scissors and cut each circle into a scale shape. After doing that to create around 400 scales, I can finally sew them onto my fabric. I do that by pulling the thread through, placing the scale where I want, and then feeding the needle through the small hole that I made. The thread is looped around each side of the hole to hold every single scale in place. The final scale count was 366, and each one took about a minute to sew on. I'll let you do the math on that one. Though, in simple terms, this took forever. But for you, you can watch it be done in just a few transitions. This is what one piece of the finished scale mail looks like up close. I think it looks super realistic, and I'm really proud of how the silver and green looks together, and I think it's a great mix of the new Nimona and the old Nimona. And bam! After a few seconds for you, and a few days for me, we have finished scale mail. From there, I put the scale mail aside and cut out the dress pattern with ample seam allowance. The fabric I'm using is a red knit. Off camera, because I didn't know what I was doing, I sewed the sleeves good side to bad side so they looked like they were coming out from underneath the dress. After that, I pinned up the side seams and then sewed them. This was challenging as I had to sew it in such a way so that I didn't have to flip the sleeves because they were so stiff with the metal that they wouldn't have flipped. From there, I sew up the darts and then take my trusty mini hair straightener and iron out all of the seams. This gives the final dress a much cleaner look. Then I hem the bottom. After pinning the last piece of scale mail in place, again, good side to bad side, then I can sew it on. Then, all that's left is to pin and sew the back seam, flip the dress, and add the snaps. And here's the finished dress. Man, that's hard to say. Anyway, I'm so happy with how it turned out. I think it looks super cool, and the snaps on the back are great for closing the dress. Let's move on to making the shoes. These shoes actually came together pretty well, especially for my first pair of doll shoes. First, I traced the shape of the sole onto a small piece of Worbla thermoplastic. Then, taking my scissors, I cut them out, and then I heat up the pieces using a lighter and mold them to the feet. Then, taking another small piece of Worbla, I create a toe and heel piece for each shoe. Then again, heat them up and mold them to the feet. A vague boot-shaped pattern piece out of paper and cut 2 out for each foot, then sew each pair good sides together. From there, I glue the piece onto the sole of the shoe, then I add the tongue and toe piece. After that, I glue all the excess fabric to the bottom of the shoe, making sure to pull everything tight. I sew a rectangular piece of fabric to the top so that later I can fold it over and have it be the top of the boot. From there, I lace up the boot using embroidery thread, and I make the lace pattern by crisscrossing the laces as I go up the boot. I trim up any excess fabric, and then using a light-colored embroidery thread, I add in some stitched details. To make the heels, I cut the shape I want out of spare foam, glued in place on the bottom of the shoe, and wrap the foam in some faux leather, the same faux leather that I used for the rest of the boots, trimming any excess away with my tiny orange scissors. The final step is to hide the ugly border between the sole of the shoe and the main part. To do this, I just glued another strip of the fabric around that transition area. And now the boots are done! I think they turned out so cool, and now I'm going to wear them on my fingers like a little gremlin because it is fun. It's now time for the magnetic wings and tail. You would think that the scale mail or the boots gave me the most trouble, but actually, it was these. For the wings that actually worked, I started by creating a dragon wing shape and then bending some armature wire into the shape that I had drawn. After that, I trace out and cut out the wing pattern from shiny red fabric and red knit, the same red knit that I used on the dress. I sew together only the bottom seams, good sides together, and cut off any excess fabric using my tiny orange scissors. After that, I flip the wings bad sides together and iron them flat. Then I insert the armature wire I made earlier, pin it in place, and then sew the wire into the wings. Here's how they look before sewing, and here's how they look after. Now I take the small strips of shiny red fabric and pin it to the top of the wing, bad side to bad side of the other shiny red fabric. Then I sew them closed, and after being sewn, I can cut off all of the excess fabric, again using my tiny orange scissors, and then flip that small piece of fabric to cover the top and create a flap. Then, again using my tiny hair straightener, I flatten the seams so they look very neat. Taking the largest piece of armature wire that I made earlier, I prepare it to be stitched into those flaps that we made. I pin the wire in place. Then using my wire clippers, I clip off any excess wire. Then I ladder stitch the wire into its little pocket, I guess? This took a little while as well, but it was well worth it because it looks very neat in the end. I then use my tiny orange scissors and cut any excess fabric off the tips of the wings. And finally, they're done! I think they look super cool, and it's really great that they're magnetic, which I sew in a little bit later. Now it's time for the tail. We're gonna yeet this first one out of the way because it sucks, and we're gonna make it again. To do that, I cut out a long narrowing fabric strip on both the shiny red and the red knit fabrics. From there I cut them out, and then sew the two pieces good sides together. I give those pieces I just sewed a flip, and then insert an armature wire and some fluff. Then, I add a magnet to one side and a little triangle tail end to the other. And with that final piece in place, the wings and tail are finally done. Are you liking the video so far? If so, give it a like. If you like the content, click the subscribe button and hit the bell. This will let you know whenever I post in the future. Thank you so much for watching so far, and now back to the video. Time for the accessories. Alright, so to make the neck bracer, which is the thing around Nimona's neck, I will make it out of Worbla, which is a thermoplastic. I trace the shape using paper and then trace it out of Worbla. From there, I use heat to make the plastic, bendable, and then shape it to the doll's neck. Then I use my big orange scissors, I bet you've been wondering why I've been differentiating the tiny ones, this is why I have big ones, to trim off any excess. Then I paint the entire piece silver to make it look a little more like armor. To make the belt, I use the same faux leather I used for the boots to create long, belt-like shapes. Then I simply sew them together and add a snap in the back. Off camera, I also bent a piece of wire into a belt buckle-esque shape. For the arm bracers, I sew a faux leather tube around the lower arm. I need 2 of these tubes, and I've done so much sewing, and so I'm going to use my wizardry skills, with a Z, to duplicate them. Rawr. To add some final details to all of the faux leather pieces, including the boots, I add embroidery around all of the edges in a light tan color. This really brings the whole thing together. It's finally time for the body painting and face-up. Let's get right to it. First, I mix up the proper color and cut it with water to make a very liquidy mixture. Then, using many layers, I paint the body and head, one layer at a time, waiting for each layer to dry in between. This ensures a fairly smooth finish without needing an airbrush. I live in a pretty dry place, so I didn't have to wait too long for the paint to dry in between layers. Once all the layers are down, I coat the entire body twice over with a 50-50 Mod Podge and water mix. After spraying with Mr. Super Clear, I start to build up some pink blushing on the cheeks and forehead, as well as some darker shades in the creases of the eyes for some depth. I'll be honest, blushing is actually one of my favorite parts, and I enjoy this so much. It's freckle time! I mix up a liquidy light brown shade, and using various small brushes and dotting tools, I speckled the body and head with adorable freckles. Gosh, I just think freckles are so cute! The face was kind of hard to get a good angle on to get the dots right, but I got it in the end. And here's how she looks all freckled. Isn't she just so cute? I love the freckles so much. Now, after freckling her, I take some gold glittery eyeshadow and place that in the upper part of the eyes. After another spray of MSC, I can finally start giving this girl a face. I start by taking some watered down white acrylic and paint in the little teeths. Then, taking a very light brown watercolor pencil, I'm outlining the eye and brow shapes. Then again, taking my watered down white acrylic, I fill in the eye area so I have a nice white base to work on. Using a peachy color from my Faber Castell watercolor pencils, I start to fill in the lips. If you ever want to know what materials I'm using, I actually list all of them down in the description below, along with any tutorials I use. Back to that light brown, I start filling in where I want the pupils to be. It was at this point that I found that my pencils were not building up color how I wanted, so I started wetting my brush and picking up the pigment directly from the pencils. Using my teeny tiny little brushes, I'm painting in strokes for the eyebrows in different shades of red, in a gradient from light to dark across the face. Painting the eyebrows like this with individual hairs gives them a more realistic look, and also I can make them look a little bit messy, just like Nimona's in the movie and in the graphic novel. Using a dark brown colored pencil, I start to darken the eye shapes so that they look a little bit less terrifying, I guess? Ugh. My dear viewers, it is at this point where I need to make an apology, because I made the mistake of forgetting to press record for the next part. What changed in the meantime was taking black to darken the eyeliner and pupils, but just doing that made such a huge impact on how the face looked, and so I'm very sorry for not being able to record that process for you. After adding in the black and brown for the eyes, it's time to lighten up the whites of the eyes, and finally add in the eye shines. Eye shines really help to bring the face to life. I carefully dot each one in using my smallest brush and white acrylic paint. After one final seal of MSC, I then use Liquitex High Gloss Varnish on the eyes and lips to give them a shine. After adding in that shine, it's time to add in her earrings. To do this, I simply stick a small sewing pin into her ear and then clip the excess sticking out the back. here's how she looks. Ah, my little gremlin's coming together. Isn't she just the cutest? The final step, it's hair time. I like using yarn wefts for my dolls. Using a mix of red, hot pink, and a dusty rose color, I create strands of yarn at double the length that I want. Then I loop these threads around a very large embroidery hoop. Taking my pet brush, I brush out the strands. I don't mind losing fluff because I make a lot of wefts, and the hair is supposed to be short, so the length doesn't matter too much either. After fluffing up the wefts with my brush, I take a short break to play with the fluffy. Highly recommend doing this, and it is actually a very crucial step in the creation process. Fluffy. I put my fluff ball aside, and when I'm done with that very crucial step of the process, the tiny hair straightener makes another appearance as I use it to flatten out the wefts. This makes them silky and more hair-like. Then, taking scissors, I cut the fibers off of the hoop. Here's my little bundle. Now to turn them into wefts. I do this by spreading glue onto a piece of plastic with a brush, spreading the fibers on top, and then using the brush to really squish the glue in there. I'm not the best at the weft making process, so it's a pretty messy thing for me, but in the end, it always turns out okay. After the glue dries, I take my tiny orange scissors again and cut off all of the excess glue to make the wefts as uniform as possible. Time to glue these fresh wefts on the head. I'm starting with the lighter color wefts in the back. I spread glue on the weft and then stick that bad boy in place, really smooshing it onto the scalp. For short hair, I find it easy to cut as I go. For each weft I glue, I use my medium rainbow scissors to cut the wefts to the proper length. The fluffy wefts like to stick up, so to combat this, I use a heated butter knife to smooth down the fibers. This makes them lay flat to the head. For the last weft of the rosy color, I glue it in place backwards and then use my heated knife to fold the fibers back over the ugly glue part. This makes it look like a nice, neat part. Thinning out stage. She's got that funny looking bald spot on top. Anyway, let's fill that in, shall we? To do that, I use the same process I did for the light pink fibers, but I don't cut as I go. To get the adorable poof and the ear tails, I use my scissors to chop a large chunk of the hair. Then I go in and cut vertically to get a feathered look. Then I use my fingers to coax the hair into place. I use the same method for the ear tails. She's finally done! Here I'm showing the finished head in all her gremlin-y glory. And here are all of the finished outfit pieces together. The boots, arm bracers, and belt, the dress, and the wings, and the tail. And now, without any further ado, may I finally present Nimona. Thank you so much for watching. I want to give a massive thank you to Dolly Anna for helping me put this together. She was so helpful in figuring everything out, and I'll put a link to her channel down in the description. If you liked the doll, or the video, or my process, let me know by hitting the like button or leaving a comment. I can't wait to read through all of the comments. If you want to help my channel grow, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with your friends, doll loving or otherwise. Again, thank you so much for watching. Catch you in the next storm. Bye!